Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Well, Mama don't allow no modern houses going on. Mama don't allow no modern houses going on. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna love my modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no modern houses going on.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio. Join George Smart and Frank King as they talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, dream about, design, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Show your support for the show by going to patreon.com/US Modernist Radio for all kinds of fun incentives to shamelessly empty your wallet. Today, we welcome architect Jim Cutler and author Mike Welton. And now, coming to you from Raleigh, North Carolina, George Smart and Frank King.
Hey, welcome, folks. I'm George Smart along with Frank King. US Modernist Radio is brought to you by Sarah Sonk. When it's time to sell your modernist home, listing on MLS alone isn't enough. Reach out to an agent who loves modernist houses with the expertise, experience, and track record to close your deal. She's Sarah Sonk, 919-601-7339. And by modboxusa.com. Turn your mailbox into a modbox with one of Modbox USA's colorful, stylish, retro mid-century modern mailboxes that complements your home's modern aesthetic and turns mail time into party time. See one now at modboxusa.com. And now here's Frank with the Modernist News.
By the way, Tom, it's Costa Concordia.
Not Coast?
That's
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry, I got you on the wrong ship.
That's all right. I happen to work for the line that happens to own that one, so I can't mention that on the cruise ships. And now the news. Dateline Copenhagen, or is it Copenhagen? I can never remember. Maybe it's a short-term memory problem. The Dutch and the windmills go together like Americans and mall food courts, so it's not surprising that the city of Rotterdam is planning to build a new one. What may be unexpected is the scope and audacity of the Dutch Wind Wheel project. A proposed 571-foot-tall bladeless steel and glass windmill that would be encased by 30,000 square meters of space, containing apartments, a panorama restaurant, and a hotel, all linked together via a series of rotating cabins. According to the architect, and I know I'm going to butcher this, Dusan Dopel of Dopel Strikers, the firm designing the project, the idea is to create an icon that will both attract tourists and showcase cutting-edge technology. He expects they may be able to finish the structure in 5 to 6 years and estimates attracting up to 1.5 million visitors a year. No word if that includes Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Dateline Sweden, when IKEA decided to sell food, and by the way, that's news to me, it chose to do it in much the same way it sells furniture, a few standardized staples sold in large quantities. The result, 150 million meatballs. That's the number of IKEA, that's the number IKEA estimates will be dished out in store cafeterias this year and every year. Though the Swedish company is better known for its inexpensive assembly-required furniture, it's IKEA's food division that is a behemoth, rivaling Panera Bread and Arby's with nearly $2 billion in annual revenue. IKEA's frugal founder, Ingvar Kamprad, was worried that too many shoppers were browsing the company's shelves on empty stomachs. Mr. Holberg said he wanted to come up with a plan that would be thoroughly Swedish and in line with the company's penny-pinching ways. The solution? Salmon, roast beef, Sweden's beloved meatballs, and, except around Christmas, of course, smoked reindeer steak. Hey, little boy, want a slice of Rudolph? Here's my question. Given the style of furniture they sell, shouldn't the food they offer be a build-it-yourself sandwich? I'm just saying. And finally, someplace in Asia. Nice views, of course, add to property value and create competitive bidding for prime space in high-rise buildings, inevitably causing stratification between tenants in said tall buildings. To avoid the inevitable divide, industrial designer Shin Kuo has designed a solution that could be construed as borderline socialist apartment theory. A building, get this, with rotating units that provide 360 degrees views for all. Quo's concept, called Turn to the Future, stacks apartments on a central pillar and spins the units in a spiral, speed not specified. Quo's moving compartments might provide a nice, not to mention consistent change of scenery and hopefully a lifetime supply of Dramamine. Not surprisingly, the concept of an apartment that moves is not so simple. Each home's gas and electric lines would have to detach before moving and reattach at their new location. What could possibly go wrong here? Houston, we have ignition. Once an apartment reached the bottom floor, it would rise on a central pillar via a crane to the penthouse spot. Think of the possibilities. Not just losing your key, but losing your apartment. Then there's the question of how much fossil fuel would be consumed moving apartments about that would give it a footprint larger than the Koch brothers and would probably, and I'm just guessing, drive your paperboy nuts. That's the Modernist News. Thank you.
All right. My guests today are Mike Welton, writer and author on architecture, art, and design for publications including the New York Times, the Huffington Post, or HuffPo, the Washington Post, I guess that would be WashPo, Architectural Record,
WAPO.
WAPO,
WAPO.
WAPO. Oh, that's an
the
Italian
Architectural
paper.
Record, that might be Archrow. Mike chronicles the zeitgeist of architecture, says his website. And I guess that might also include the Schadenfreude of style, the Welschwartz of design. He covers it all in Architects and Artisans, a blog that's been around now, what, about 5 years, Mike?
5.5 years.
5.5 years. His new book, Drawing from Practice, reinforces that nothing is as powerful and engaging as hand drawing. One of the architects Mike profiles in the book is Jim Cutler, principal of Cutler Anderson Architects of Bainbridge Island, Washington State, our other guest today. Jim's firm designed over 300 residential, commercial, and cultural projects, plus they design hardware, furniture, and lighting through Reveal Designs. The firm has won 6 AIA National Honor Awards, plus 40 other design awards. Jim is best known by the general public for designing, along with Peter Bolin, a lovely 66,000 square foot starter home for Microsoft's Bill and Melinda Gates. Welcome, Mike and Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mike, for our listeners who aren't familiar with CAD or computer-aided design, which has kind of taken over a lot of architecture firms in the last 25 years, tell us a little bit about how CAD got started and how it has kind of gobbled up a lot of people's capacity for hand drawing.
That's a better question for Jim than it is for me because he's been involved in it from the very start.
Okay.
He knows.
Jim, how did CAD come about and start sort of taking all this emphasis away from drawing by hand?
Well, obviously, the good things about CAD documentation are its level of precision. Now, that you have to take that with a grain of salt because when computers were really starting out, one of the first lines was garbage in, garbage out. The input is still important in the result, but they are precise instruments. They are great ways to store data, to store information that you've developed, and they're easily changeable. You're not standing around with a pile of eraser shavings on the floor when you have a major change in the building. There are multiple for large projects like multi-story buildings and things like that. There are lots and lots of reasons to use computers where you can have multiple layers that show mechanical systems, electrical systems, fire suppression systems, structural systems, where you can catch conflicts, there are just infinite number of good reasons to be using a computer for production of documents. And production is 50% of what the architects do, which is produce documents which are the instructions for someone to build a building. So, when I started my practice, we were drawing on vellum. I'm old, and then we started switching over to computers 20 years ago, longer than that, even maybe 25 years ago. And then it got to the point where the universities were making drawing with your hands an elective course as opposed to something that was absolutely required for describing the world in your thinking. So that's how those are the good sides. I think both Mike and I have discussed some of the serious downsides of it also, but I think that's beyond the scope of your immediate question.
One of the downsides is Richard Meyer told me that when they designed the Getty Center in Los Angeles, that every drawing was ink on Mylar by hand, every single drawing for that museum, which you think about it, it's 500 plus drawings.
Easily.
Phenomenal. So in Jim's chapter in this book, we discussed the impact of not drawing by hand on someone's brain. And what he told me was that he was noticing over time that as architecture students graduated and came to work for him, they were less and less able to keep up with him conceptually. So, Jim, you might talk about that a little bit.
Well, what it is that, and I'm obviously prejudiced. I've gotten myself in trouble. As my partner said after my last quote, which was quoted in an architectural record, which is a big-time magazine, where I said that AutoCAD made my employees stupid. My partner responded by saying, "Don't expect any free software from them."
Okay. No.
So, and I said that, and it was I was being interviewed by the editor at the time, Bob Ivey, and it was sort of a free-ranging discussion. And of course, that one little quote out of context was in bold in headlines on. That's the way the press works, but it's a much broader story than that. I have to say, I don't want to be one of these guys who's kind of saying, well, in my day we walked 20 miles barefoot through the snow to get to school, but we were taught to draw, and drawing was really fundamental. When I started, I took a full year, about 10 hours a week of freehand pen and ink drawing, that is with a fountain pen, going out, sitting down, either in the winter inside spaces and the summer outside, and just drawing, and being critiqued by teachers. And at the time I just thought, well, it's the process. And then I had my own practice, and we drew. And then over the last, over about a 20-year period, I believed I was seeing a sort of a degradation of the conceptual skills of my staff. That is that my staff, when you would talk to them about the concept of some idea for a building, that they weren't able to make the leap to how you would begin to execute that concept or even begin to understand it. And over a period of time, I'd complain about it. And anecdotally, when I talked to Bob Ivey, the editor of Record, he said all the other architects, Meyer was complaining about it, and Piano was complaining about it, Foster was complaining about it. And so a lot of people were seeing the same stuff. I just, through a series of odd coincidences, started to investigate it physiologically. That is that my wife was reading some article in the New Yorker, and it mentioned a woman at Tufts University who had just written a book. Her name was Marianne Wolfe. She'd just written a book about how children learn to read. It was called Proust and the Squid. It was a very obscure book, and but in it there were things that seemed to relate to drawing. And so I gave her a call one day and said, could it be that, all the stuff you're doing about reading is related to people using computers and drawing? And she said, well, I think you're onto something. And it's a rather long story that got me to this. I'm not going to bore you with that. But she got me in touch with a woman who luckily was here in the Northwest at the University of Washington, who was a neurophysiologist. And Virginia Berninger, her name was. And Virginia, so I invited Virginia to come over to my office to observe how an architecture firm works. I explained to her my hypothesis that there was something going on between the computer and not drawing that was affecting my students and my employees who are also my students here. And so she came over, and I sat her down, and I said, well, I'm going to do a drawing for you. And I quickly sketched up a little perspective of a building. It took me maybe 45 seconds because I've been drawing all my life. And then I went over to an employee's desk, and I said, could you draw this on the computer in front of her? And they started hitting keyboard numbers and moving a mouse around, and about an hour and a half later, they had the same drawing. And no, this is true, though. And so and the odd thing about her was she was an interesting, if not strange, person. She refused to call drawing. She kept on calling it the externalization of cognition. And I kept on saying, it's just drawing. What are you using that kind of language? And then she started, after observing, she gave me a relatively long lecture. And the lecture started off like this. She said, Jim, everybody is endowed with a certain amount of what I will call working memory, kind of like RAM in a computer, okay? Some people have a lot of it, some people have less of it, but it's a fixed quantity. So since it's a fixed quantity, some people have more, some people have less, but it is limited. And it resides primarily in the upper right quadrant of your brain. She was a neurophysiologist that did brain scans, fMRI brain scans. And she said, when you have a thought, now that upper right quadrant of your brain is where you conceptualize ideas. And when you have a thought and you externalize it by drawing it, you free up more working memory to conceive more. And your brain is like any other aspect of your that area of your brain is like any other part of your brain. The more you use it, the more you build up more synaptic connections, because that's all we are as personalities. We have a certain amount that's given by instinct, and then the rest is building synaptic connections. We literally build our brain up through experience. And so if you're using that and you are freeing up more, by drawing, you're freeing up more of that working memory, and you can conceive more. So when you layer that tracing paper the way I see you doing that, all you're doing is externalizing what you're thinking so you can think more. I said, that makes sense. And she said, furthermore, she said, do you ever think about how we communicate? See, she thought about this a lot because she's mostly did child development stuff. I said, yeah, sure, we talk. And she said, well, what do you think we did before we spoke? I said, I don't know. She said, and she raised her hands up. Why do you think we move our? Why do you think we move our hands around when we talk? While we gesticulate while we talk. And she said, because prior to language, which people think has only been around for under 100,000 years, we used our hands to communicate. They were our method of communicating. So that's interesting. What does that have to do with drawing? She said it has to do with conceptualization, because our brain is an organ that's evolutionary, right? It just, in the very core is this, the limbic system. The core of our brain is basically we share with lizards. And there's all these layers to the brain as we go out. And the very outer edge which is the last of our evolution, is where we conceptualize, up in the upper right corner. Do you know what's adjacent to that in your brain? I said, no. She said, your hands. So our ability to conceptualize, from her standpoint, evolutionarily, had grown out of the use of our hands because we communicated with our hands by gesticulating. So our hands and our ability to conceive are related to one another. And she said, I can prove that to you because what we've done is we've done experiments with children where we have children, meaning like 10th, like 8th graders and stuff like that, young adolescents. And she said we have half of them write with their hands, write reports. We have the other half choose their letters on a computer board, on a computer, to write the reports. We have, what do you call it, statistically significantly better are the students who use their hands to form their letters. More articulate, more prolific, more accurate. The ones that physically write are much better than the ones that choose their letters. She said she got it down to the point where they would have children hold their hands out where they couldn't see their palms. They would write numbers on their fingers that they couldn't see. The ones who could tell you what the numbers were better at math. There's literally a relationship, ultimately, from what she was telling me, between the use of our hand and the development of our conceptual skills. Now, I've worked right to the end of my story. There were a lot of clues before that. Like there's this guy, Brian Brandenburg, who's the son of a famous writer from the 70s. And Brian sells people, he goes to corporations and teaches the execs on how to draw. They pay him a fortune to do it so they can be more creative. There are people who make money at this. So the bottom line was we don't hire anybody anymore who can't draw with their hands.
Whoa.
Because I get better conceptual skills.
So do you think it should be a core course? I mean, do you think it should be required by the university rather than an elective?
I believe so. And now let me just say, and this is important because I'm going on public record here, is that back right before the recession, I'd convinced the University of Washington to help me fund an fMRI experiment. fMRI means functional magnetic resonance scanner, where we were going to use students, they call them human subjects, where we were going to have a certain group take the regular core courses, which didn't require drawing, and then take another group that could take the core courses, but we would offer for free a year of drawing. We were going to test their conceptual skills in the fMRI machine, which sees what area of your brain lights up when you're given a conceptual question. We were going to test them before and after. And then the recession hit and all the funding and everything dried up, and I didn't pursue it. So all of this stuff I'm telling you is coming from just talking to neurophysiologists, but has not been physiologically tested, on a scientific level. And I believe that everything, unless it can be proved, is, I hate to use the term, but a bull. And so what I'm giving you right now is a little bit of bull because I haven't been able to put together the funding to prove it out. If it's proved out that on some level the use of the current, I won't even say the use of a computer, the current interface with the computer is in some way retarding the conceptual development of architecture students, then I would think that every school would immediately be switching their curriculum. But it needs to be proved.
So you really need a Kickstarter campaign, Jim, to get you some more human subjects and get this thing put in the lab. We can test it out.
It does, but I'm 65 years old, and I just learned what Kickstarter was a year ago, and and I've got about 18 projects scattered over about 10 time zones right now, and it's not the focus of my life. I think it's important. And I at the time, Bob Ivey was still the editor. He's now head of the AIA, but he was still the editor of Record. And he said, "Jim, if you can prove this thing scientifically, I'll put it on the cover of Record." So, it would be great if this program got a big enough soapbox to help us put together a real clinical analysis, because it's meaningful. But when you just say stuff like this, I'm giving you the words of a neurophysiologist I had visit the office. But until you can back it up with real scientific evidence, it's just a lot of talk.
Well, do you see the work product as inferior from those who haven't had?
I don't know how to describe that, because a lot of architecture is subjective in your analysis of it. I would say I have lots of anecdotal information from a lot of really admirably excellent architects who all are saying the same thing. And if they're all observing the same sort of lessening of conceptual skills in their employees and younger staff, I believe there probably is something there. And then when, I took it the one step further to go to a scientist, their first word was, "I think you're onto something." Matter of fact, every scientist I talked to, it was 3 different people that got me to Virginia, and every single one of them said, "Wow, we never thought about that. We think you're onto something."
I am holding in my hand Mike Welton's new book, which is called Drawing from Practice, Architects and the Meaning of Freehand. Not only does it include biographies and discussion with about 26 different architects, including Marlon Blackwell, Peter Boland, Ellen Casserly, Jim Cutler, of course, Phil Freelon, Frank Harmon, Tom Kundig, Daniel Libeskind, and many more. It also shows a number of their sketches and drawings, so you can see how this process of conceptualization really works for them. Mike, tell us more about the book and how you came to choose this subject.
I wrote a column for the Huffington Post back in 2011 about drawing by hand, and talked to a number of architects, Michael Graves,
who just passed away, who was passionate about the act of drawing as a really important part of architecture. And that post on Huffington Post went viral and did really well, so I developed a book proposal from that, and then called up a number of people like Jim here, who I knew. Jim had studied with Louis Kahn at the University of Pennsylvania, and I knew that, and so I was curious about what his beliefs were, as I was with others. Not everyone is passionately engaged in drawing by hand. Some people, Lorinda Spear at Architectonica, said, "Well, there's no real difference between a computer and a hand drawing. They're both the same thing. They're just different ways of going at the same." But almost everyone else is very much in favor of hand drawing as a way of learning, as a way of understanding. So to look at a project, to look at Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest, to understand it, as Frank Harmon knows, the best way to get a handle on it is to draw it, because there's an interaction between your eye and then your brain and then your hand and a piece of paper. And the final product is really fascinating. So what you'll see is in Daniel Liebeskind's chapter here, there are early drawings of the master plan for Ground Zero in New York, and then there are follow-up drawings. You see him layering and layering and layering, and finally there are photographs that follow up and show you exactly what he was conceiving. So is this book in the bookstores now?
It will be released on May 11th.
Okay.
It's from Routledge Architecture Press. It's a great Britain firm, and it's 220 pages. It's probably 200 illustrations. It's been received really well by the press. So far, so good.
Well, wonderful.
Is there a Kindle edition on the evil computer?
There is a Kindle edition on the up-to-date computer. Yeah.
Hey, I think the computer is a great tool. I remember I was very specific. It's the interface.
Yes.
I honestly think the way that we interact with the computer physiologically is more likely the problem than the computer itself.
Yeah, everyone said that, it's great for working drawings. It's great for all the stuff that's repetitive and has to be done over and over again. But conceptually speaking, the hand drawing is where the ideas start. So this is a book about the act of creation and the hand drawing as an integral part of that.
So, Jim,
here's my question, guys. Sorry, George. Do you think the typewriter hurt literature in terms of cognition and creativity? I mean, back in the day, books were written, novels, written longhand, and then they invented the typewriter, and then Dashiell Hammett was able to knock out, in novel after novel. Do you think similarly the typewriter somehow?
No, I know that Shelby Foote wrote by hand, and that William Faulkner wrote by hand. They wrote by longhand on legal pads, and it's still done.
I don't know. I don't have an answer on that because it's not a realm that I've done an investigation on. But I would say that recently, even though I'm 65, I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and we read together quite a bit. My wife reads, and we actually read aloud around the house, and it is remarkable the acuity and precision of language that was present in the 19th century, where letter writing was, a big deal as opposed to email. It's sort of stunning how public figures, particularly when you read a history of, Lincoln or any kind of major public figure, how well they spoke and how well they wrote. That I don't see as much, or in our current culture, and we read a lot of history and stuff. So I look at the way our leaders speak now and the way they spoke then, and it's remarkably different.
Well, and I've got a favorite author named James Lee Burke, and my wife's reading a Faulkner now.
I like him too, yeah.
Well, and she said she's reading Faulkner, and she came out and she goes, you know what? I can tell that James Lee Burke read a great deal of Faulkner by the way he writes his own books. So I think there is something to something lost when you don't. He's taking advantage of Faulkner's longhand writing, I believe, when he creates his own novels. So it's reflected. The artistry is reflected in his current novels because he read. You can tell he read quite a bit of Faulkner.
So if you are a neuroscience graduate student listening to our show and are interested in a dissertation project, please get in touch with us. We will help you get your Kickstarter campaign going, and we will put this issue to rest. So, Mike, I want to go back to your blog a little bit. It's now 5 years old, and you turn this out 5 times a week, right?
5 days a week. That's
5
correct.
days a week.
Yeah.
So that's about 1,600 postings so far?
That's about right. Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
There are about 300 words for each one, maybe 12 photographs for each one.
So I remember when you started.
Yeah.
And you were kind of by yourself as an architect. There weren't that many architecture blogs back then.
I started because I was writing for all these magazines, and they started dropping off one by one. So I think in 1 week, Metropolitan Home died, and then ID magazine died at the same time. And I had pitches into both of them. And I remember Metropolitan Home's editor saying, we'll be back in touch on Monday. And then on Monday, I learned that they were gone. So and that was, I think, October of 2009. And I took the last quarter of that year to develop the basic format for architects and artisans. And, it's done pretty well.
Yeah, it's done great.
So it's a great forum. It's not a commitment to modern architecture. In fact, yesterday This week I'm going back to the archive and just pulling up 2 or 3 or 4 that I like. And yesterday's was on Harwell Hamilton Harris, the great modernist and the head of the Texas Rangers, now at the University of Texas, back in the 40s and 50s, 60s. Today's is about Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest. And, I'll pull something on Louis Kahn and Louis Sullivan. So there's this whole range of architects in it, some living, some not living, some modernist, some not modernist, some postmodernist.
Yes.
And then Jim's work as well, of course.
I just have one more question for you, Jim. I hold in my hand a special red pencil. It says ITO-YA on the end. It has a little black eraser. I understand this is quite the special pencil. Yeah. Could you tell us about it?
Oh, well, I like to draw. When I say like,
really?
It's my job. It's earned me a living for the last 45 years, and since I'm not exaggerating, I probably average about 5 hours to 6 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 40 years drawing. You get to be a bit of a connoisseur of the implement you draw with. And I happened to be on a project actually in Japan and was walking on the Ginza, and there was this little, if you've ever been there, there's some stores that are 8 stories tall and 12 feet wide. And one of them is the Itoya store. And I walked in and I saw this beautiful pencil, and I tried it out, and it had really the nicest looking eraser. And it erased beautifully, and the lead density was just right for doing a quick sketch. So I bought a dozen, and I got back, and I really liked them, so I taken the card of the salesperson, and then we developed a relationship with them, and then I buy 100 every 6 months. They're about $1 a piece. And then, of course, what I immediately did was I have dinner with Peter Bolin once a month. Matter of fact, I guess I'm having dinner with him in about a week here. And for his birthday, I gave him a dozen of them. And so, of course, Peter immediately wanted the guy's card, and he now buys several hundred a month, for everybody. So if you when he won the gold medal, if you look at there's a photograph of him on the cover. He's got like 4 of those red Itoya pencils sticking out of his pocket. So they are really good pencils.
He sent me 12 of them, Jim. After I
really,
interviewed, he sent me a dozen.
He gives them away as gifts now.
So we'll have a link to how to get the Itoya pencils on the website for the show. We'll also have a link on the show for how to get Mike's book, Drawing from Practice. Let's close up. You mentioned Peter Bolin. You and he designed a fairly unusually large house about 20 years ago, and that soaked up your firm for a while.
It was a competition.
It was a competition. There were 23 architects invited. They took it down to 10, and then they took it to 5. And then the last 3 remaining firms all were hired to design the house independently with Bill.
Yeah.
And then after a 10-week interactive session with all 3 firms, the firms were then asked to put the work up in separate rooms in a big warehouse that Microsoft owned, and then Bill's family came and juried the 3 remainders, and we won.
So this house is really large. It's 66,000 square feet. One of the nicknames
that big, but
is called Xanadu 2.0, after the name of the estate in Citizen Kane. And I'm wondering, Jim, in 1995 or 7, it was finished. Is that right?
Sort of, yeah. Yeah,
so,
we won the competition in 1990, and there were some hiatuses here and there. Actually, late '89, we won it. Peter had a health problem that came up right after we won, and
okay.
So we delayed a lot of the work until Peter could recover. a good friend.
Being 20 years ago, that would have been what? About the time of Windows ME or Windows Vista, maybe? I mean,
I have no idea.
Has the house had to be upgraded or anything since then? I mean, how does Bill Gates upgrade his house?
I suspect, all I can tell you on that is, and I cannot speak too much, frankly, publicly about that project, but I would say that when you try to incorporate state-of-the-art technology into a building, even now, but back then when things were changing rapidly, it was a bit like chasing your tail, because every time you would design in sort of seamlessly some bit of technology, our processes, that is, of documenting it, getting everything built and ready to install the technology, are so slow compared to the speed of change in technology that by the time we'd be 6 months, preparing to use a particular technology, it had changed so radically we'd have to redesign. The screens in that building originally, the world's first high-definition screens, they required a space about 4 feet deep behind them, plus a separate individual computer that cost a great deal of money to actually drive the screen.
And had to be incredibly expensive, too, I imagine.
They were very expensive, and by the time we were in construction, the amount of space required was less than half. And if you come back today, it's about 4 or 5 inches versus 4 feet. So when you're trying to incorporate technology, the most important thing is to be very flexible.
Here's my question: did you hand draw the designs for the house of the owner of Microsoft?
Absolutely, I did. Now,
attaboy.
And most everything was hand drawn, and I know that at one point it was Bill. Peter will tell you this. And I'm a detailer. I'll sit down on an airplane ride and I'll knock out 25 3-inch to the foot details on a flight to New York, and since I was flying back and forth between Peter's office and ours quite a bit, I mentioned that I was knocking out all these details, and I'd show them to Bill, and it would just drive him crazy that I was doing by hand. And at the time, there was the earliest version of an iPad. It was called an EO pad. I don't know if you guys ever remember it, but it looked kind of like an iPad and had about 1% of the memory and about a hundredth of the speed. But he got me one of those, and I would try to draw the details on a computer screen by hand on the flights, and it just wasn't as productive. Where I could do 3 details an hour, it was taking me an hour and a half to do a detail on a computer screen.
So I guess I'm wondering, Jim, like when Bill Gates wants to upgrade all this, does he just press a button and Windows Update fixes the house?
The trouble, one of the things in my profession is that there are parts of it that have not changed in 100 years or more. There are parts of it that changed rapidly, particularly like lighting and things like that. But in the realm of actually physical human beings assembling shelter for other human beings, there's a lot of things that have not upgraded at all. And actually, as human beings, we have not upgraded at all. We still need to be warm and dry and have a bunch of other emotional clues to have satisfied lives.
I've heard that on the ceiling of his living room, there's an inspirational phrase from The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald engraved in the ceiling.
It's on a rotunda wall.
It's on a rotunda wall. So he used Fitzgerald.
And it is.
I can't remember.
I can't remember.
It's like reaching for the stars, something to that effect.
I'll look it up. Our crack research staff will get on it, make sure it's on the website.
So we covered Scott Fitzgerald, we've covered William Faulkner, we've covered Shelby foot. That's pretty good.
That's not bad.
That's okay.
Yeah, there you go.
That's not bad at all.
So
For a bunch of Southern guys, right?
Fitzgerald's from the Midwest.
Oh, okay.
So I want to thank you both, Jim and Mike, for being on the show today. We really appreciate your being here, and we will have more information about drawing from practice, architects, and the meaning of freehand on the website. It's a great book. Please go buy it. US Modernist Radio is sponsored by ModboxUSA.com and their swanky, colorful, stylish, retro, mid-century modern mailboxes, and by Sarah Sonk, the real estate agent who loves modernist houses just as much as you do. 919-601-7339.
Visit US Modernist Radio on the web at usmodernistradio.org for links about people and buildings mentioned today on the show. US Modernist Radio is recorded at Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Meanwhile, follow us on Twitter at US Modernist or email us at comments@usmodernistradio.org. US Modernist Radio is a production of North Carolina Modernist Houses, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and Frank and I will be back in 2 weeks for another cantilevered, floor-to-ceiling, less is more concrete and steel edition.